August 18, 1940. 23,000 feet above the English Channel. The air is thin, vibrating with engine noise and tracer smoke. Below, the white cliffs of Dover flash between clouds like broken bone. A formation of Bf-109s streaks across the sky, their yellow noses glinting in the sun. The German pilots are veterans, aces from France, Poland, Norway. Their radios hiss with clipped voices. Achtung, Spitfires, Zwofer hoch! They see them. 8 silver specks, closing fast. The Spitfires dive out of the sun, wings elliptical, engines screaming at full throttle. The leader, Squadron Leader John Ellis of Numbers Research 10 Squadron, squeezes his trigger. His 8 Browning machine guns spit fire, converging on the lead Messerschmitt. The tracers tear through the sky. The German pilot jerks the stick, pulling into a vertical climb. His Daimler-Benz engine roars as the 109 flips over into an Immelmann turn, looping behind Ellis in one seamless motion. Now the hunter is the hunted. Ellis yanks the Spitfire into a hard roll. The G-forces crush him into his seat, the canopy rattling with the strain. He hears the rattle of cannon fire behind him, short, controlled bursts. Armor-piercing rounds shred the tail of his plane. He banks toward the channel, losing altitude fast. The airframe shudders. Smoke pours from the engine cowling. His wingman dives past, guns blazing, forcing the 109 to break off. The Messerschmitt streaks by overhead. Its pilot, Oberleutnant Hans von Hahn, checking his mirrors, watching the Spitfire spiral below. For a second, both men lock eyes through glass and sunlight. Enemies who've never met, bound by the same laws of flight and fear. Ellis bails out over the sea. His parachute blossoms white against the blue. The German pilot circles once, then turns east toward France. His fuel gauge is already in the red, 25 minutes left before he must land. He's killed one opponent, but he won't even make it home if he fights another. Below him, British lifeboats are already heading for the downed pilot. The RAF will retrieve Ellis within the hour, debrief him by nightfall, and send him back to his squadron in 2 days. The Messerschmitt won the duel, but the system won the day. Because every British pilot who fell over England was recovered. Every German who fell over the Channel was gone forever. The Battle of Britain wasn't a contest of airplanes, it was a contest of endurance. The Bf-109 was faster. The Spitfire was more agile. But above them, both loomed something bigger, a network of radar towers, observers, and airfields that could replace men faster than Germany could train them. Up in the thin air above Dover, the battle looked like chaos, twisting contrails, burning engines, dying men. But beneath it, an invisible order was unfolding. Britain had turned its sky into a system. The Germans were fighting for control. The British were fighting for continuity. And in that difference lay the fate of Europe. By the time the sun set over Dover, 136 aircraft would fall from the sky. Both sides would claim victory. Both would bury their dead. But only one would wake up tomorrow with its radar repaired, its pilots rescued, and its defenses stronger than before. For the Luftwaffe, the day was a battle. For the RAF, it was just another rotation. The duel of the Bf-109 and the Spitfire had begun, a battle between perfection and persistence, fought mile by mile above the Channel. And by the time it ended, the future of the war and the idea of air power itself would never be the same. For decades, history books and documentaries told the same story. The Supermarine Spitfire, elegant, fast, beautiful, saved Britain. Its sleek wings, its graceful turns, its very name became shorthand for victory. But the truth, as always in war, is messier. The Spitfire didn't win the Battle of Britain by being the best fighter. It won because it belonged to a system that could afford to lose and recover, while its enemy could not. The myth began in 1940 itself. Newspapers called the Spitfire the miracle plane. Propaganda films showed them streaking across the clouds, outmaneuvering clumsy German aircraft. In pubs and shelters, Londoners imagined a lone pilot, a young man in a scarf and goggles, dueling the invaders over their heads. It was a comforting image, romantic, heroic. It made the war seem fair, one man's skill against another's. But the Battle of Britain wasn't fair. And the Spitfire wasn't a miracle. It was a tool, one piece in a larger machine built to survive. Technically, the German Messerschmitt Bf-109E was every bit the Spitfire's equal, and, in many ways, superior. It could climb faster. It could dive harder. Its 20mm cannon fired explosive shells that tore aircraft apart in seconds. At medium altitude, it was the deadliest single-seat fighter in the world. The Spitfire's advantage wasn't its performance. It was its context. Every British pilot flew under a web of command, control, and communication. The Dowding System. Radar stations scanned the coast. Observer posts relayed visual sightings. Sector controllers plotted positions on giant maps, phoning squadrons before the enemy even appeared. By the time a Spitfire scrambled, its pilot already knew where to climb, how many were coming, and what altitude to expect them. The Bf-109 had none of this. German pilots flew across the channel in tight formations, relying on sight alone. They had no radar coverage, no ground control, no early warning once they left France. When they arrived over England, they were already running out of fuel. Even worse, the Luftwaffe's main bomber escort strategy, keeping 109s close to the slow Heinkels and Dorniers, negated the fighter's agility. The 109 wasn't designed for formation flying. It was designed to hunt. Yet Göring demanded his aces stay tied to the bombers, strangling their advantage. The result was chaos. High-speed duels fought on empty tanks, pilots bailing out over enemy territory, and victories that meant nothing because they couldn't be sustained. Meanwhile, the RAF rotated squadrons like clockwork. When one was depleted, another replaced it. Mechanics worked through the night to patch bullet holes, swap engines, reload ammunition. The same airfield could launch a dozen sorties a day without pause. The myth said the Spitfire won through elegance. The math said it won through organization. Even German pilots noticed. Adolf Galland, commander of Jagdgeschwader 26, admitted after the war, "The Spitfire was a beautiful opponent, but it wasn't the plane that beat us. It was the control system behind it." On the surface, both aircraft seemed evenly matched. Top speed, Spitfire Mach 1, 355 mph, Bf-109E, 357 mph. Climb rate, nearly identical. Armament, Spitfire, 8.303 machine guns, 109, 2 cannons and 2 machine guns. But the differences that mattered weren't in performance charts, they were in endurance. A Spitfire shot down over England meant a pilot parachuting into friendly fields, a rescue truck waiting, and a replacement plane being prepped. A 109 shot down over Kent meant a man lost forever, and a hole in a roster Germany couldn't refill. By August 1940, Britain was building more fighters per week than Germany was losing, and Germany was losing faster than it could build. That's not a dogfight. That's economics at 20,000 feet. The perfect fighter myth made for good headlines, but the truth was colder. The Spitfire didn't need to be perfect. It needed to exist, again and again and again. And that repetition, that ability to recover, is what turned survival into victory. Perfection is fragile. Systems endure. And in the skies over England, that truth was about to be tested by fire. Because as August turned to September, the Luftwaffe shifted its target. No longer airfields. Now, cities. London was next. And the duel between the Bf-109 and the Spitfire would expand from dogfights over the Channel to firestorms over the capital. The Battle of Britain was no longer just about the sky. It was about the soul of a nation, and which system could hold out longer before breaking. Before the first shots were fired over the Channel, the duel between the Spitfire and the Bf-109 had already been decided, not in airfields or hangars, but in factories, design bureaus, and political offices that defined two entirely different ways of waging war. Both aircraft were born from genius. Both were born from fear. In 1934, the German Air Ministry issued a secret request: a single-seat fighter capable of speeds over 300 miles per hour, designed for the new Luftwaffe's doctrine of lightning war. Willy Messerschmitt, a man obsessed with lightness and efficiency, answered with a radical design: all-metal monoplane, retractable landing gear, closed cockpit. The prototype, the Bf-109 V1, first flew in 1935. It was fast, clean, lethal. By 1939, it was the most advanced fighter in Europe, the spearhead of Blitzkrieg. In Spain, during the Civil War, it shredded obsolete biplanes and proved that maneuver warfare could extend to the skipe. Germany's design philosophy was brutally pragmatic: speed and climb first, everything else second. The Bf-109 was an engine with wings attached. Its narrow undercarriage made it tricky to land, but its Daimler-Benz DB601 engine gave it incredible acceleration and a power curve unmatched by early Allied aircraft. The Luftwaffe built its doctrine around the machine: rod of pairs, swarm formations, disciplined teamwork. It was mechanical precision turned into tactics. Across the Channel, the British story began in quieter desperation. In 1931, Britain's Royal Air Force was still flying biplanes. Budgets were cut, morale low. The Air Ministry's obsession with cost kept innovation frozen, until one man, Reginald J. Mitchell of Supermarine, decided to gamble everything on a design that broke the rules. His answer was the Spitfire. Its elliptical wings weren't just elegant, they were aerodynamic perfection, reducing drag while maintaining lift. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, though weaker than the German DB601, produced a smoother power band that made tight turning effortless. Where the 109 climbed like a rocket, the Spitfire could pivot like a knife. But what mattered most wasn't the shape. It was the context. Britain's Air Ministry, under the guidance of Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, didn't just want fighters. It wanted a defensive network, an integrated machine where radar, command centers, and squadrons worked as one. The Spitfire was built to live inside that machine. Dowding's idea, dismissed by many at the time, was simple: technology beats numbers. Britain couldn't match Germany plane for plane, but it could build a system that made every plane count twice. The result was the Dowding System, a nationwide web of radar stations, chain home, observer posts, and communication lines feeding into fighter command headquarters. From there, controllers directed squadrons to intercept raids with near-surgical timing. When a German bomber group crossed the coast, the system detected it minutes before it reached land. Pilots scrambled only when necessary, conserving fuel and stamina. Every fighter launched was guided with real-time data. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, relied on visual scouting and rigid planning. German formations launched en masse, searching for their targets without centralized direction. Once they crossed the Channel, they entered a blind zone. The two nations had built the same weapon for two different kinds of war. Germany built a Predator, fast, aggressive, but dependent on initiative and short missions. Britain built a Guardian, efficient, coordinated, capable of fighting indefinitely. On the ground, the contrast deepened. German production centered on a few large factories under constant political interference. Every Bf-109 required the approval of the Air Ministry. Engines came from one source, airframes from another. Final assembly scattered across occupied territories. It worked in peacetime. In sustained combat, it broke down. Britain's industry decentralized. Hundreds of subcontractors, furniture shops, bicycle factories, garages, built Spitfire parts in secret. Wings from Birmingham, fuselages from Southampton, propellers from Glasgow. The entire island became a single assembly line. In June 1940, when France fell and invasion loomed, both systems went to war. The Messerschmitts launched from concrete runways in occupied France, polished, precise, backed by the confidence of recent conquest. The Spitfires scrambled from grass fields in Kent and Sussex, half-built, patched together, maintained by teenagers and night shift volunteers. On paper, the 109 should have won. It was faster to altitude. It packed a heavier punch. Its pilots had combat experience across Europe, but the war wasn't on paper. As the first raids swept across the Channel, the differences that looked minor in design became decisive in endurance. The Bf-109's limited range, barely 400 miles, meant 20 minutes of fighting over England before fuel ran out. The Spitfire could stay aloft nearly twice as long and always had a friendly field below. Each nation's engineering reflected its soul. Germany believed in dominance through design. Britain believed in survival through adaptation. And when those philosophies met above the Channel, one would find that genius couldn't compensate for exhaustion. The 109 and the Spitfire weren't just machines. They were symbols of two civilizations colliding in the sky. By July 1940, the stage was set. 2,000 aircraft, 200 miles of channel, 2 months to decide the fate of Europe. Wars are fought by men, but they are decided by math. And in the summer of 1940, the numbers behind the Battle of Britain were brutal, invisible equations that no amount of courage could change. The Luftwaffe crossed the Channel with more planes, more aces, and more experience. On paper, it should have overwhelmed the RAF. Germany, over 20,500 combat aircraft. Britain, fewer than 700 Spitfires and Hurricanes ready for flight, but numbers alone can lie. The real math lived inside engines, tanks, and time. Every Messerschmitt that took off from northern France carried fuel for roughly 410 miles, barely enough for 25 minutes of fighting over Britain. After that, the pilot had two choices: turn home or crash. Every minute spent dogfighting over Kent or London ate into that margin. Pilots learned to watch their gauges as closely as their gun sights. 10 Minuten, they would mutter, 10 minutes left. Then 5, then 2. A single mistake or delay meant ditching in the Channel, where British rescue boats waited for prisoners, not allies. For the RAF, fuel wasn't life or death. It was routine. Spitfires and Hurricanes fought within sight of home fields. They could rearm, refuel, and relaunch within half an hour. The difference was endurance. The Bf-109's Daimler-Benz DB601 engine was superb. Its fuel injection allowed inverted flight and smooth power delivery. But it drank fuel faster than any Allied engine of the time. The Rolls-Royce Merlin in the Spitfire was less advanced, but far more efficient. Over a day's combat, an RAF squadron could fly 3 sorties. The Luftwaffe's 109s might manage 2, if they survived. That margin of endurance changed everything. When the Luftwaffe struck at dawn, British radar saw them coming 30 minutes out. Pilots scrambled only when necessary, intercepting at optimal altitude. While the Germans fought the weather, the Channel winds, and dwindling fuel, the British fought time. And time was on their side. By August, the statistics began to tell a story even the Reich couldn't ignore. Between July and September 1940, the Luftwaffe lost 1,733 aircraft. In the same period, the RAF lost 915. But while the Germans lost aircraft and pilots, Britain recovered both. Over 70% of RAF pilots shot down parachuted safely into English fields and returned to combat. German pilots, falling over enemy territory or the sea, were captured or drowned. That was the hidden attrition, not in planes, but in men. Each Bf-109 pilot took months to train, often with combat experience stretching back to Spain and Poland. They were irreplaceable. The RAF, by contrast, was absorbing hundreds of new volunteers every month, men from Canada, New Zealand, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. Britain was turning survival into a process. The numbers on production lines were even starker. German fighter output, August 1940, 200 aircraft. British fighter output, same month, 467 aircraft. By September, the RAF had replaced nearly every loss. The Luftwaffe had not. This was the math of exhaustion. Even inside the Luftwaffe's own reports, cracks appeared. Maintenance crews struggled with overworked engines and spare part shortages. Every airfield in northern France was packed with grounded aircraft waiting for repairs. Fuel shortages made the problem worse. The Luftwaffe's aviation fuel came from synthetic plants in Germany, vulnerable to British bombers. As the campaign dragged on, missions shortened, sortie rates fell, and morale collapsed. Meanwhile, the RAF's network of sector stations, Biggin Hill, Tangmere, Northolt, functioned like clockwork. Engineers patched runways, mechanics replaced engines, and controllers tracked every flight by radio. Dowding's system turned chaos into endurance, and in endurance lay victory. At one point in late August, Goring visited his aces at Pas-de-Calais. He asked what they needed to break the British defense. Galland answered dryly, "A squadron of Spitfires." It wasn't sarcasm. It was respect. The 109 was the perfect offensive fighter, fast, lethal, aggressive. But it was built for short wars, not sustained ones. It was a scalpel used in a war of attrition. By the time the Luftwaffe realized the trap, it was too late. They were fighting in a sky they could not control, over an island that could not fall. Every Messerschmitt shot down was one more nail in the coffin of Germany's air supremacy. The RAF's pilots were tired, many half-deaf from engine noise, hands blistered from constant sorties. But they slept in their own beds, ate hot meals, and knew that if they lived through today, they'd fight again tomorrow. Their enemy couldn't say the same. The math of fuel, range, and fatigue had already written the outcome, long before the last bomb fell on London. And on August 18th, the war in the air would hit its breaking point. The day both sides called the hardest day. Dawn broke over southern England like a flare, the kind of orange light that makes every shadow feel dangerous. It was Sunday, August 18th, 1940, the day both sides would later call the hardest day. By 5 o'clock a.m., radar stations along the coast were already pulsing with echoes. Chain home masts at Dover, Rye, and Foreness detected hundreds of blips forming over Calais and Cherbourg. Fighter command's plotting tables lit up like constellations. To the controllers at Uxbridge, it was clear. The Luftwaffe wasn't testing the line anymore. They were coming to break it. The first wave hit Kenley and Biggin Hill, two critical RAF sector stations guarding London. Over 1,000 aircraft took to the air that morning, 500 British, 700 German. Above the channel, the contrails began to form. The bombers, Dornier Do 17s and Junkers Ju-88s, droned northward in tight formation, their black crosses glinting in the sun. Escorting them were the Bf-109s of JG-26 and JG-51, flown by some of Germany's best aces, Adolf Galland, Werner Mulders, and Gerhard Schöpfel. Below them, squadrons from No. 11 Group scrambled to intercept, Spitfires from Biggin Hill, Hurricanes from Croydon and Tangmere. At 12,000 feet, the two forces met, the air filled with gunfire. The first minutes were chaos. A Hurricane from 32 Squadron caught a burst from a 109 and disintegrated mid-air. Seconds later, a Spitfire turned inside a diving Messerschmitt, raking it from nose to tail. Both aircraft fell, one trailing black smoke, the other silver vapor. There was no formation now, no order. Just fragments of duels, men trying to outthink, outclimb, outlast each other in 3 dimensions. On the ground at Kenley, armorers ran between hangars as bombs began to fall. Explosions tore through fuel trucks and workshops. The base's operations room was obliterated. A mechanic later wrote, "The world went white, then red. When the dust settled, we could see the sky through what used to be the roof." But the radar network stayed online. Fighter Command still saw everything. Up above, Pilot Officer Jeffrey Wellham, age 18, twisted his Spitfire into a climb. His voice crackled over the radio. "Tally-ho! 12 bandits! Angels 15!" He fired short bursts at a 109, saw pieces fly off its tail, then felt a thud, cannon shells ripping through his fuselage. Oil splashed across his windscreen. He didn't bail out. He dove instead, plunging through clouds, heart hammering, until he saw the coastline. He landed his crippled Spitfire in a farmer's field, alive, barely. At the same moment, in the sky above, Adolf Galland's 109 was running low on fuel. He had already shot down 2 Hurricanes, but his gauge was nearly empty. He radioed his wingmen, "Zurück, home!" They turned south, engines coughing, just as Spitfires rose from below like sharks breaching. One German pilot ditched in the channel. Another glided to a crash landing on the French coast. By noon, the entire southern sky was a maze of smoke and drifting parachutes. At 3:00 p.m., the second wave arrived. Ju-87 Stukas, slow and vulnerable, escorted by more 109s. The RAF pounced. In less than 15 minutes, 30 Stukas were shot down. Their dive sirens, once the terror of Europe, became their death song. On the ground, the airfields burned. But the system held. Communications rerouted through backup stations. Replacement squadrons rotated in. By dusk, the shooting stopped. The silence after the final engines died was total. The kind of silence that follows exhaustion, not peace. Both sides claimed victory that night. The Luftwaffe reported 147 British fighters destroyed. The RAF claimed 100 German aircraft downed. The truth was bloodier and smaller. RAF losses, 68 aircraft destroyed. Luftwaffe losses, 69 aircraft destroyed. But the math beneath those numbers told the story. Britain replaced nearly every lost plane within 48 hours. Most of its pilots parachuted safely home. Germany replaced none that week. Every lost 109 was a trained ace gone forever. The Luftwaffe's momentum snapped. The invader had hit something it couldn't quantify, an enemy that absorbed punishment, reorganized, and kept fighting. Even Goering admitted it in private. His pilots returned furious, their fuel tanks empty, their nerves shattered. Galland's post-action report read simply, "Our fighters reached the limit of their endurance." At Biggin Hill, Dowding walked through the ruins of the operations room, stepping over broken glass and burnt cables. The walls were blackened, but the radios were still working. A young controller, her uniform covered in soot, looked up and said, "We're still on the air, sir." That was the moment the Luftwaffe lost the Battle of Britain. Not when their bombers fell, not when their aces died, but when they discovered that the British system couldn't be broken by force, only by exhaustion, and exhaustion never came. The next day, the radar towers still stood, the Spitfires still scrambled, the 109s still ran out of fuel. August 18, 1940, was the day Germany realized it could not win the air. The hardest day, and the turning point of the war in the sky. By late August, the Luftwaffe's momentum was bleeding out. Goering had promised Hitler that England's defenses would collapse within weeks. the RAF would be annihilated in the air, its airfields bombed to rubble, its pilots killed or too few to fight. But instead, the numbers told a different story, a story of attrition that Germany's high command refused to see. At first glance, the math looked simple. Germany held the initiative. Each day, 200 to 300 bombers crossed the Channel, escorted by 109s from bases at Calais, Abbeville, and Cherbourg. Each day, they dropped hundreds of tons of bombs, but every mission followed the same deadly equation: range in, range out, no room for error. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 had an operational radius of 125 miles. That meant it could only stay over England for 25 minutes before it had to turn back. Any damage, delay, or dogfight past that limit meant disaster. Pilots described the feeling as a clock ticking in their heads. Every burst of gunfire, every climb costing them precious seconds of survival. Even if the mission succeeded, the Channel itself became a graveyard. When a 109 was shot down, there was no rescue. British air-sea rescue units combed the waters for their own men. German pilots who bailed out into the cold surf had minutes to live. For the RAF, the same distance was safety. A damaged Spitfire could glide to a friendly airfield, land in a farmer's field, or ditch on the coast. Within hours, its pilot would be back in uniform, his aircraft repaired or replaced. That difference in geography turned into a difference in endurance. In the first month of the battle, Germany lost one fighter for every 2 bombers destroyed. But by September, the ratio was 1-to-1, catastrophic for a force that depended on its fighter screen. The Channel trap wasn't a place. It was a law of diminishing returns. Every mile the Luftwaffe crossed to reach England was another mile they couldn't use to fight. Every victory over London left them weaker on the way home. As the fuel ran out, the 109s fell, not in battle, but on empty tanks. Dozens were found along the French coast, engines seized, landing gear buckled, pilots dead from crashes during emergency landings. And still Goering pressed them on. He shifted targets from airfields to cities, convinced that bombing London would draw the RAF into one final, fatal confrontation. Instead, he gave Britain exactly what it needed: time. With the focus on London, the RAF's sector stations in the south recovered. Runways were repaired, replacement planes flooded in, and the radar chain was reinforced. What Goering thought was a killing blow became a reprieve. The German fuel situation worsened. Every sortie required thousands of gallons of aviation fuel, most of it synthetic, shipped from refineries deep inside Germany. British bombers began hitting those plants at night. By mid-September, some Luftwaffe units were rationed to one mission every 2 days. Mechanics siphoned fuel from damaged planes just to keep others flying. In the words of one squadron commander, "We still had our aircraft. We just had nothing left to fly them with." The RAF, meanwhile, fought within a closed loop of abundance. Fuel flowed from home depots to local airfields. Ammunition was delivered hourly by truck. Pilots rotated shifts, rested, and returned. The British system wasn't just enduring, it was evolving. Controllers learned to predict Luftwaffe formations by radar signature. Squadrons refined tactics, splitting into high cover and low attack wings. Each week, the RAF got smarter while the Luftwaffe got slower. Attrition had become asymmetrical. The Germans lost one pilot. He was gone forever. The British lost one pilot. He returned in 3 days. One German bomber destroyed meant the loss of aircraft, crew, and fuel. One British airfield bombed meant 6 hours of repair work. The Luftwaffe was fighting an enemy that could heal faster than it could wound. Inside Fighter Command HQ, Dowding's analysts plotted the losses. A clear pattern emerged. German fighter readiness, July, 90%, August, 75% September, 50%. Even with numerical superiority, half their planes were grounded for maintenance or repairs. Adolf Galland later described it bitterly. We could win every engagement and still lose the war. The Channel Trap turned every sortie into a slow suicide, a logistical noose that tightened with every mission. For the Luftwaffe, the Channel was not a barrier. It was a filter. It stripped away aircraft, pilots, and time until only the limits of endurance remained. For Britain, the same channel was a shield. Every mile of water protected its infrastructure, its radar, its pilots. By September 15th, Goering's grand offensive had become a retreat disguised as persistence. His aces were exhausted, his bombers mauled, his confidence gone. The German High Command faced the numbers and saw the truth. The Luftwaffe could not sustain the fight. They had fallen into a mathematical trap, and Britain had closed it without firing a shot. The invasion of England, once codenamed Operation Sea Lion, was quietly postponed, then cancelled. Germany had reached the limits of range, logistics, and willpower. The sky above Britain remained British, and the price of perfection, once again, was collapse. August 25, 1940. The Luftwaffe's best, Jagdgeschwader 26, the Abbeville Boys, are preparing for their 5th sortie of the day. The mechanics are exhausted, sunburned, and half-deaf from the endless roar of Daimler-Benz engines. Their commander, Adolf Galland, lights a cigarette and studies the map pinned to a crate. The channel glimmers beyond the airfield. England lies just 30 miles away. Across that narrow strip of water, in a bunker at Uxbridge, the controllers of RAF No. 11 Group are doing the same thing. On the wall-sized plotting table, colored markers move like pieces in a chess match. Each counter represents a formation, red for hostile, blue for friendly. The phones never stop ringing. Radar reports, observer course updates, fuel calculations. The air above the channel is alive with math. 2 command systems, 2 philosophies, both about to collide. At 10:12 a.m., radar station Chain Home Dover reports a massive inbound formation, altitude 15,000 feet, heading northwest. Within seconds, the information travels by landline to Fighter Command Headquarters, then to 11 Group's sector room. Plot confirmed, the controller says, her pencil scratching the map. Raid 63 approaching from Calais, strength 80+. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of 11 Group, leans over her shoulder. He knows what's coming. Galland's men, escorting bombers bound for London. He gives a calm order. Scramble Biggin Hill, Tangmere, and Kenley. Get 610 and 32 squadrons airborne now. Bells ring in the dispersal huts. Pilots sprint across grass fields, boots pounding, engines already turning. Within minutes, the sky fills with climbing Spitfires and Hurricanes, the sound so deep it rattles windows for miles. The British have time to intercept. They always do. That's the power of the system. Across the channel, Galland's 109s are already in formation. He checks his fuel gauge, does the quick mental math. 40 minutes of flying, 25 of combat, 5 to spare. Every second is rationed. As his squadron crosses the coast near Dover, the radio crackles, "Achtung Spitfires! High 12!" They're waiting. The sky erupts in motion. The British attack from above, diving out of the sun. The 109s roll inverted. Braking formation, engines howling. Galland pulls hard left, climbing to meet them head-on. A Spitfire flashes past his canopy, close enough for him to see the pilot's face. White scarf, goggles, calm concentration. For 30 seconds, it's chaos. Every aircraft spinning, rolling, climbing. Bullets hiss past glass. Metal tears. The entire battle compresses into a single roar of engines and fear. Then, discipline takes over. Galland's 109s regroup. They dive on the bombers below, forcing the Spitfires to chase. The Luftwaffe's formation dissolves, but its mission continues. The bombers reach their target, a railway junction outside London. Explosions bloom across the ground. Back at Uxbridge, controllers track every dot. Raid 63 turning back, one says. Fuel low. Vector 603 Squadron to pursue. 2 Spitfires from 603 Squadron break through the clouds, cutting off Galland's group as it heads for home. They attack from above, firing short, tight bursts. 2 109s spiral down, smoke trailing. Galland curses. He checks his fuel again, almost empty. He presses the throttle, diving toward the channel. "Everyone brake! Home! Home!" The Spitfires chase until they hit their limit. Then they turn back, engines sputtering from the climb. The Germans make it across the water, barely. As Galland's wheels touch down at Abbeville, his engine dies. He sits in the cockpit, heart still racing, staring at the fuel gauge. 1 liter left. His ground chief runs up. "Herr Major, any luck?" Galland exhales smoke. "Luck? We don't have enough of it left." At the same moment, in Kent, Squadron Leader John Ellis lands his Spitfire at Biggin Hill. His plane is pockmarked with holes, but repair crews swarm it before the engine even cools. By evening, it will fly again. 2 systems at work. JG-26 fights with brilliance. Ace pilots, advanced machines, tactics honed in a dozen victories. But each sortie drains its men like water from a cracked tank. No. At 11, Group fights with rhythm, radar, coordination, and a deep bench of replacements. It doesn't win spectacularly, it simply never stops. By the end of the day, Galland's unit has flown 6 missions and lost 5 aircraft. 3 pilots are dead, 1 captured, 1 missing over the channel. Ellis's squadron lost 4 aircraft too, but all 4 pilots survived, parachuted, and will fly again within the week. When night falls, the statistics tell the truth no propaganda can hide. JG-26 readiness, 40%. 11 group readiness, 82%. Germany's best was burning itself out. Galland's pilots wrote in their diaries that week, "We fight hard and well, but we cannot fight forever." At Uxbridge, Dowding reviewed the day's reports. He marked the loss columns, nodded once, and simply said, "They'll be back, so will we." That was the difference. The RAF didn't need to win the day, it just needed to be there tomorrow. And tomorrow, they would be. To the men in the cockpits, the Battle of Britain felt like chaos. Flashes of sunlight, tracer fire, screaming engines. But from the ground, it looked like choreography. That choreography was the Dowding System, the most sophisticated air defense network the world had ever seen. A machine made not of metal, but of information. It began on the coast. From the Orkneys to the Isle of Wight, radar towers known as chain home scan the sky in long, invisible arcs. Their massive antennae, crude by modern eyes, could detect aircraft over 100 miles away. Each tower transmitted raw data by landline to Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory, where women of the WAF plotted raids on vast tables using colored blocks and grease pencils. The system looked simple, but it was revolutionary. Before radar, air defense was guesswork. Fighter squadrons scrambled blindly, wasting fuel and nerves, often chasing nothing. Now every formation crossing the channel was tracked in real time. Dowding's network could see the future 10 minutes before it happened. In the heart of Bentley Priory, inside a darkened control room lined with maps and telephones, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding and his controller staff directed the air war like conductors leading an orchestra. Above their heads, a clock marked each 5-minute interval in red, yellow, and blue. Every sector of the country moved in rhythm with that clock. A radar report from Dover would appear as a small red counter on the map. The Observer Corps, thousands of volunteers with binoculars, confirmed visual sightings. Telephones buzzed, data poured in. The colored block was moved along its predicted path, altitude updated, strength estimated. Dowding's voice cut through the static. Raid 64, strength 70 plus, heading London, scramble Biggin Hill, Tangmere to standby. Within seconds, sector controllers relayed the order. At each airfield, sirens blared. Pilots ran for their Spitfires and Hurricanes. Within 5 minutes, another blue counter appeared on the map, friendly interceptors climbing. Every movement above the English coast was mirrored below, in miniature, on that table. From chaos came precision. The system linked radar, ground control, and fighter squadrons into one feedback loop. It told each pilot where to go, when to fight, and when to break off. That's why the RAF could survive with fewer planes. It never wasted a sortie. By contrast, the Luftwaffe had no equivalent. Once their 109s left France, they vanished from command's view. Their communications were limited, their coordination improvised. German radar stations, Freya and Würzburg, were still experimental, and none covered the channel. The Luftwaffe's pilots fought blind, directed only by pre-mission briefings and instinct. Dowding's system turned that blindness into an advantage. When a raid was detected, he didn't throw every squadron into the fight. He measured the response, 2 here, 4 there, some held in reserve. No pilot flew without purpose. No fuel was burned in vain. And when a squadron landed, repair crews and refuelers were already waiting. The entire country functioned like one continuous engine. Every time a Spitfire took off, a mechanic, a controller, and a radar operator made it possible. The Luftwaffe had the faster planes. The RAF had faster information. Dowding's genius wasn't in building better fighters. It was in creating a system that multiplied the effectiveness of what he already had. For every sortie the Germans flew, Britain flew fewer, but smarter. The difference grew with every day of battle. On August 24th, British radar detected 3 separate raids forming over France. Fighter Command intercepted all 3, shot down 30 aircraft, and lost only 8. The Luftwaffe couldn't understand how the RAF kept appearing out of nowhere. They suspected spies. They suspected luck. They never realized it was math. Each successful interception reinforced Dowding's conviction. The network was working exactly as intended. Even when airfields burned, when bombs cratered the runways, the control system stayed functional. Backup lines rerouted communications. Secondary radars filled the gaps. Britain's command structure was decentralized before the word existed. Galland, who respected his enemy even as he fought them, later wrote, "We had the aircraft. We had the pilots. What we did not have was a system." In one sense, the Battle of Britain wasn't a contest of flight at all. It was the first great war of data. Radar gave Britain time. Communication gave it precision. Coordination gave it endurance. The 109s flew faster. The Spitfires fought smarter. Every German pilot faced not one opponent, but an entire network that could see him coming, measure his distance, and plan his defeat before he even crossed the coast. When Churchill visited Bentley Priory after the battle, he watched the women of the WAF moving their counters in silence, listening to the hum of telephones, the click of switches, the calm voices issuing commands. He said nothing for a while, then he murmured, "Never have so many owed so much to so few." But even he knew the few were never truly few. Behind every pilot stood thousands who never saw the sky, but owned it just the same. That was the Dowding System, the invisible weapon that turned the tide of the air war, and by September it had done something no one in Europe thought possible. It had stopped the Luftwaffe. Now, with the airfield safe and the radar network intact, the British could finally do what they'd been waiting for since June: fight on their own terms. The next battle would not be about defense. It would be about dominion. Who would rule the sky, not just for a day, but for the rest of the war? By the end of September 1940, the Battle of Britain was no longer a battle. It was an equation that had already solved itself. The Luftwaffe could still bomb, still kill, still terrify, but it could no longer win. The math of collapse was complete. From July to October, the Luftwaffe lost 1,887 aircraft and 2,662 men. The RAF lost 1,023 fighters and 544 pilots. At first glance, the difference looked narrow, but the recovery rates told the real story. Nearly 70% of British pilots who bailed out returned to duty. Nearly 90% of German pilots who fell were gone forever. The system had done its job. Britain didn't need to shoot down every German plane. It only needed to make sure its own kept flying. The Bf-109 was a masterpiece of engineering: sleek, efficient, deadly. The Spitfire was a masterpiece of balance: precise, forgiving, enduring. But neither machine decided the outcome. What did was the invisible architecture beneath them: logistics, communication, radar, and the ability to replace loss with speed. The Luftwaffe had entered the campaign believing air superiority was about skill. The RAF proved it was about structure. Dowding had built something the Germans didn't understand until too late: a living network that absorbed shock and adapted in real time. Even when bombers cratered the runway series, the network kept breathing. Britain turned the sky into an ecosystem. Germany turned it into a battlefield. And ecosystems outlive battles. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe made its last great push: 600 bombers and 500 fighters over London. Radar saw them forming hours before they reached the coast. Squadrons rose in waves to meet them. Over the Thames, the air turned silver with contrails and sunlight. By the end of the day, the Luftwaffe had lost 56 aircraft. The RAF lost 28. For the first time, German bombers turned back before reaching their targets. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, indefinitely. The Battle of Britain was over. But its legacy had only begun. The duel between the Bf-109 and the Spitfire defined the future of air warfare. It proved that speed and firepower alone couldn't guarantee victory. Only integration could. The war in the air was no longer about individual pilots chasing glory. It was about entire nations learning to think like machines. From that summer forward, every major air campaign, from the American daylight raids to the Soviet air defense of Moscow, borrowed from Dowding's design: radar, command networks, rotating squadrons, controlled attrition. The Spitfire had won hearts. The Dowding System had won the war. Even the Luftwaffe's survivors admitted it. Adolf Galland later wrote, "We were superior in the air, man for man, plane for plane, but the British fought as a machine. You cannot defeat a machine that learns." That line became the quiet epitaph of 1940. The year war evolved from courage to computation. It wasn't that the RAF was better trained or braver. It was that it had the right kind of bravery: collective rather than personal, systemic rather than impulsive. When people later said the few saved Britain, they were half right. The few fought. But the many, the radar operators, the mechanics, the controllers, the engineers, made their survival possible. The duel that defined the Battle of Britain wasn't between aircraft at all. It was between two visions of modernity. The Bf-109 represented craftsmanship, precision, individual mastery, national pride forged in steel. The Spitfire represented adaptation, mass production, information flow, shared control. In the sky above southern England, the industrial and the human merged for the first time. It was no longer man or machine. It was man through machine. Perfection, once embodied in a single aircraft or ace, now belonged to the network. From then on, every war would be fought not by heroes alone, but by systems that could think, track, and recover faster than their enemies. The Luftwaffe came to conquer Britain. It left having created the blueprint for its own defeat. A warning written in vapor trails. The Spitfire and the Bf-109 would meet again, over Malta, over North Africa, over Europe, but they would never again fight as equals. Because in 1940, Britain didn't just defend its skies, it defined what air power was. And in doing so, it transformed warfare from an act of valor into an act of coordination. By October 1940, the skies over Britain had fallen silent while the Great Duel was over. The Bf-109s no longer prowled the Channel coast. The bombers that had once darkened the sky now came in smaller waves, striking at night instead of day. The Battle of Britain had ended, and with it, the myth of German invincibility. But for the pilots, victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. At Biggin Hill, the air smelled of oil, grass, and burnt metal. Ground crews pushed damaged Spitfires into the hangars, their fuselages scarred by cannon shells. Pilots stood beside them, silent, thin, hollow-eyed, knowing they'd lost friends, but not the war. Out in the countryside, radar towers still turned, their long arms sweeping the coast. Fighter Command was still watching. The system was alive, vigilant, ready for the next wave. And on the other side of the Channel, the Luftwaffe began to rebuild again. Galland, Mulders, and the others studied their defeat and drew one conclusion: speed alone was no longer enough. The age of the piston engine, the whirling propellers, the screaming superchargers, had reached its peak. The next war in the air would not be fought with wings of aluminum, but with engines that breathed fire. Jet power was coming. In secret hangars across Germany, engineers were already working on the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. It would be faster than anything alive. 540 miles per hour, twin turbines, armed with 430mm cannons. To the Luftwaffe, it was redemption through technology. But across the Channel, the British were not standing still. At Gloucester, a handful of engineers under Frank Whittle were building their own prototype, the Gloucester Meteor. The duel between the Bf-109 and the Spitfire had defined the piston age. The next duel, between the Me 262 and the Meteor, and later the Mustang, would define the jet age. The same questions would return. Could perfection outrun production? Could brilliance outlast a system? Could a single machine change the outcome of a war already decided by numbers? The sky was about to become faster, deadlier, and colder. The Battle of Britain proved that endurance could beat innovation. But what would happen when innovation evolved into something no system had ever faced before? When the first Me 262s took flight in 1944, they would make the old aces look like ghosts from another world. Men who once ruled the sky with propellers and courage, and as the jet engine screamed over a burning Europe, the ghosts of 1940, Galland, Dowding, Ellis, Welham, would watch from memory, knowing that the world they built in the clouds had changed forever.